Hello, my fellow gore horror besties. So today we're gonna kind of do things a little differently. Most of the time I will show you guys a video and then we'll do a deep dive, things like that. But I couldn't find a video that was short enough to go over everything. I didn't want to put on an 18-minute video and then talk to you guys about it and keep you on here for forever talking about it. So we're going to talk about it, go over some things, and then I will play a video that I did want to play. And then we'll talk about it a little bit more. So this is about Daniel LaPlante. He was a 17-year-old convicted of murdering 3 people and put in prison. So we're gonna jump right into it. This was one that was requested by a friend of mine. So let's get started. So Daniel LaPlante, he was born in May of 1970 in Townsend, Massachusetts. He had a really rough childhood. He was diagnosed with several mental illnesses, dyslexia, things like that. And he had allegedly faced abuse from a stepfather that was in his life, and then he claimed to have suffered sexual and psychological abuse from a psychiatrist as well, not only his stepfather. So we're not going to talk too much about his childhood. We're going to jump right into when he was 16 years old. So when he was 16 years old, he became infatuated with this girl named Tina Bowers, another 16-year-old that was in Massachusetts. And this girl was recently going through a lot because she had just lost her mother to cancer. And she was just living with her dad and her sister. So Daniel had called her one day and reported that he got her phone number from a common acquaintance. So after being very persistent, some telephone conversations with Tina and her younger sister, he convinced her to go on a date with him. So when they finally met, Tina was actually, from what she says, surprised that Daniel was totally the opposite of what she had perceived him to be. But either way, she went ahead with the date, even though she felt really uncomfortable when he continuously kept asking details about her mother's death. And so she hurried through this meeting, date, went home, but she had no idea that he would become obsessed with her and begin harassing her. So a few days later, Tina and her sister had decided that they were going to kind of do like a seance. They wanted to contact their deceased mother. So once they were doing the seance, they got freaked out a little bit because there was banging on the walls. And so they were just trying to figure out what these rhythmic knocks through the walls were, and they believed that it was their mother's spirit. But they were actually unaware that Daniel was hiding in a crawl space between the walls separating their toilet from the plumbing pipes and was tormenting them. His behavior worsened over the next several months. He was pounding on the walls. He began misplacing furniture, changing channels on the TV, drinking leftover milk, and he would do all of these things as soon as somebody left the room, and then he would go back in the crawl space. So essentially, he was living in their house, and they had absolutely no idea. So he continued this, and he began writing taunting messages on the basement walls, making them look like they were written in blood. They tried to approach their father about it, but he didn't want to believe them. He didn't want anything to do with it. He was dismissing their claims as childish antics, stemming from the grief of losing their mom. Well, January 1987, things had reached, worse when the girls had another female friend at their house. When they believed paranormal occurrences continued, the girls contacted their father from a neighbor's house. He returned to the house. He found the furniture just completely a mess. His daughters had stated as well that the toilet began being recently used, but he wasn't home. From what I'm guessing, that's what I was getting from that. He wasn't home. And so that's when he, as investigated further, he found Daniel hiding in his late wife's closet, dressed as a Native American and armed with a hatchet. They took Frank and the 3 girls hostage in the bedroom, but Tina managed to escape and call the police from her neighbor's house. He was absconded and hostages were escorted away from the house. However, when Frank returned 2 days later to get some of their belongings, Daniel was at the house. So he called the police, and this time they arrived and they were able to capture him from his carefully concealed hiding space. But per the discoveries, again, he had been living there for months. And the dad never wanted to believe the girls. He just said they were being childish. So he went and was arrested. For harassing them. He was detained in juvenile court until October of 1987. So he spent from January to October in juvie and then was released on bail. But he jumped right back into that crime. He was so quick on that one. He would soon return to petty crimes like burglaring houses before he committed a horrendous act 2 months later. Tina Bowen has not been in the public eye too much. She really just wanted to be left alone, so there isn't a whole lot going on like about her, that kind of thing. And so I don't know what she's up to these days here. So now then that's going to jump us right into the next horrendous thing that he did. Like, horrendous. So we're done talking about Tina Bowen now, and we'll move on to talk about what he did next. So, on November 16th, 1987, he was 17 years old, again, just released from juvie. He burglarized this house of the Gustafson property in Townsend, Massachusetts. And then in December, he snuck into their home, and there was a mom and her 2 children. I think it was her husband or her fiance, Andrew, wasn't home. It was just Priscilla, who was 33, William was 5, Abigail was 7, and Priscilla was pregnant as well. So he broke into their home on December 1st, 1987, and he raped and shot Priscilla. And she was just a pregnant, beautiful nursery teacher, 33 years old. He then proceeded to kill her children, William, aged 5, and Abigail, aged 7, by drowning them each in separate bathtubs. And Andrew was the one that found Priscilla first. Apparently, he was too stunned and didn't search for the children. He just left the house and called the police and let them do a search. He didn't try and look for his children at all. But he says that was just a state of fear and shock from seeing Priscilla the way that she was. So Daniel was taken into custody within 2 days of the triple homicide to be questioned for, but he was released shortly after because there was no concrete evidence against him at the time. But things changed later that same day as a 17-year-old ran away when officials arrived at his home to interview him further, making his guilt apparent. He just took off, dipped right out of there. So while he was running from them, he stole a van from a neighboring home and took the woman who owned it hostage and drove away. And he threatened a lumberyard owner with a gun, and that didn't help him either. But thankfully, he was arrested and found to be tried as an adult. So he was 17 years old, going to be tried as an adult for the triple homicide. And so he was convicted and given 3 consecutive life sentences with the possibility of parole after 45 years. So he has to spend 3 consecutive sentences, which would make it 15 for Priscilla, 15 for William, 15 for Abigail, and then he could be eligible for parole. So the video that I want to play for you guys is about how he feels that he should get off because he feels that it's unconstitutional that he was given such a long time, which I definitely disagree, but we'll talk about that. So we're going to play this video real quick.
Antoinette Daniel LaPlante wants the chance at parole, but according to his sentence, he has to serve 45 years before he's eligible. His attorneys in court today arguing his sentence is unconstitutional and saying that the court's decision could potentially set a precedent for other juvenile murder cases. LaPlante is ordered to serve 3 consecutive sentences of 15 years each for a 1987 triple murder. Relatives of the victims were in the courtroom today. LaPlante was 17 years old when he was charged with the deaths of a young pregnant mother named Priscilla Gustafson and her 2 children in Townsend. Some of this argument relies heavily on some recent overhauls to the juvenile judicial system, including a law adopted back in 2014 that says the longest term juveniles convicted of murder must serve before they can go before the parole board is 30 years. Also, life without parole for juveniles was overturned in 2013. But that 2014 law is not retroactive, so a judge doesn't need to accept it. The judges heard the case today. They now have 130 days to make their decision, and if that request is granted, LaPlante could see a parole hearing in the next 2 years.
As you can see, he did appeal it, and they ended up making the decision to uphold the conviction because they said that he affirmed his original verdict based on the sheer heinousness of the actions and the fact that he seemed to show zero remorse with decades gone by in prison. When he addressed the judge about being let go on getting his parole, he addressed the judge and not the family. He did not acknowledge that her family was there, and he just was trying to show that he had remorse to the judge. So the judge did hold it for what they made it, and they didn't change it. He has to do 45 years. So now today, he is 54 years old, and he remains at the Massachusetts Correctional Institution, Norfolk, and he is expected to remain there until 2032. At 62 years old, he will be eligible for parole. I think that he is a danger to society, and he should not be approved for parole. I understand that he was a juvenile when he was arrested, but if you look at his track history, he was doing all of these crimes, got arrested, got let go, and less than 2 months after he served time, he murdered brutally 3 people. That's horrible. And I agree with his family. Her family wants him to spend the rest of his life in prison. And I 100% agree. Because I just don't understand why he should even get to see the light of day when he murdered these beautiful babies, and they were so young and they had so much life ahead of them. And I don't agree either that he only got 3 life consecutive sentences because he murdered a pregnant woman. Why didn't he get any time for the murder of that poor baby? And so that's just my thoughts. I don't think that he should be released, but I mean, he still has a while before he can even see a parole board. And at that point, there's no guarantee that he will be paroled. So he still could essentially live the rest of his life in prison, but we'll have to just find out in a few years. I would love to know your thoughts on this. Do you think that he has served enough time? Do you think that it matters that he was a juvenile? Should he be forgiven? Things like that. Let me know, and I'll talk with you guys again soon. Got lots more stories coming up. Be safe, be vigilant, be aware. Love each other, and I'll see you guys soon. Thank you.